Hello, everyone. At this time, I'll be sharing the upcoming Sunday School lesson for the first Sunday of September. It is called Abram Builds an Altar at Mamre. It comes from Genesis chapter 13, and your lesson highlights verses 8 through 18. This Bible study of Genesis 13 is the first of 5 lessons on the theme of leaders set the worship example, and that is so true. On Tuesday, I was having lunch with some pastors and church planters. Our goal was to see what we might do to provide a better ministry with members of the Coast Guard in our area here in Northeast North Carolina. In the conversation, one pastor who has been in leadership, pastor of his church for 12 years, described how he made no major decisions the first 5 years to change the church, but thereafter began to lead the church in making a number of significant changes to their worship and overall ministry. In the process, they lost some members, but gained substantially more members, particularly younger couples and adults with children. Their worship and ministry style has been particularly effective and meaningful to Coast Guard families. Today's lesson is about a couple of important life decisions. One was how Abram kept peace with his nephew Lot when it was apparent that the land could no longer support both of them with their growing tribes. The other is about leading your people to a place of worship. Question number 1, found on page 5 of the Learner's Guide, is important. The question is, why does God deserve our honor in all that we do? Now think about that. How does God deserve our honor, not just in things we do at church, but through every day of life? I've been around long enough to see some of the worst that can happen when dealing with an estate. Usually when the parents die or a sibling dies. I have seen family members disagree to the point where they won't even talk to one another. As my wife's family and then my own family began to consider estate planning, we, referring to our families, of course independently, we agreed to work out most of the details prior to the death. Now, this helped tremendously. There were no surprises, and the rest of the details we were able to work out much more easily among ourselves, being as equitable as possible. Since I handled most of my mom's estate, I made sure that my 2 sisters got the extra penny if the accounting could not divide equally 3 ways. In one instance, my mother had parked interest in her parents' home. And because of a number of factors, me and my sisters, decided to give away her small part of the house rather than seek income from her sister, who owned the vast majority of the house. We rationalized that we had not put any money into the house, so why should we take any money out of it? It was more important to us that her sister owned the whole house, free and clear. As we begin examining this passage, I highly recommend that you begin your study with verse 1, not verse 8. Abram and Sarai had just returned from a stay in Egypt. Although Abram had already become a wealthy man with many animals, a famine in the land we call Israel had caused them to migrate south to Egypt, obviously for better grazing land for their herds. Chapter 12, verse 16 reads, quote, Pharaoh treated Abram well because of Sarai, and Abram acquired flocks and herds, male and female donkeys, male and female slaves, and camels. So when we begin chapter 13, Abram and Sarai are back in the land we call Israel. The famine is basically over, and they are repopulating the land where they had come from. But also, Abram's nephew Lot had been very successful as well when his little empire had grown. Chapter 13, verse 2 following, Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold. He went by stages from the Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had formerly been, to the site where he had built an altar there. And Abram called on the name of the Lord there. This describes how wealthy Abram had become. He was very rich, livestock, silver, and gold. But also the fact that wherever he settled, he first worshiped. He built an altar. He glorified and sought God and God's will for him and his tribe and well-being. Then we come to the reason for Abram and Lot needing to separate. Chapter 13, verse 5 and following, quote, "Now Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. But the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together, for they had so many possessions, and there was quarreling between their herdsmen." Abram was a very spiritual man, but he was also a very practical man. He realized that for he and his tribe to grow, and for Lot and his tribe to grow, they must separate. There was plenty of land, although some land was better than other land, and some of the inhabitants who had lived there longer than them were less friendly and accommodating than others. There was always the risk that in moving, things could go bad as well as they could go well. But in order to keep peace in the family, Abram deferred to Lot. He gave Lot first choice of the land. Then Lot chose what he believed was the most fertile and the best land. And we will see that Lot also chose that he and his wife and his daughters, 2 daughters, they chose to live near Sodom, a city known for homosexuality and violence. For the purpose of my teaching, I want to highlight 4 things to consider. And the first is compromise. Compromise is not always the right thing to do. But in this case, it was. By all rights, Abram could have just taken the land that he wanted and told Lot to leave. But he believed that keeping the family together and happy was more important than increasing his personal fortune. In this case, compromise worked out in Abram's favor. Secondly, is choices. Life's choices either make us or break us. Lot chose based upon what looked decisively better to him at the time. The land of Jordan, east of where they were, looked lush and green like the Garden of Eden. Yet evil lingered around the corner. That evil would overwhelm Lot's good intentions. The third is God's promise. Again, God promised Abraham abundance. He was promised this land of Israel forever. For every future Hebrew tribe that came from that genealogy, they would have the land. They would become too numerous to count. God told Abram to walk around the land, all around it, basically claim it. Claim it all. It's yours. And the fourth is worship. This altar at the Oaks of Mamre would prove to be highly significant to the future of God's people. This site was about 2 miles north of Hebron, or pronounced Hebron. In Genesis chapter 18, God would appear to Abraham. By now he has been given this new name. Abram is Abraham. God would appear to Abraham at these oaks with 3 heavenly messengers. Now, these messengers would set the stage for the birth of Isaac. Later, Sarah would be buried in a cave near here. And later, almost all of the family would be buried here as well, from the tribe of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when later David is anointed as king by Samuel, it was where? In Hebron. Finally, although the oaks at Mamre might not have been as lush and fertile as Jordan, this land more than met the needs of Abraham and his growing tribe. God provides. God bless. Have a wonderful week.